Now, the other big news today was the Coalition unveiling its campaign costings, which show the budget bottom line improving by $14 billion over the next 4 years. But they're going to go deeper into deficit in the first couple of years. I asked Shadow Treasurer Angus Taylor why.
Well, we're also reducing debt by $40 billion over that time frame. That's important. $14 billion reduction in deficits, $40 billion in debt. And what we're doing is balancing household budgets that have been wrecked under Labor. We've seen the biggest reduction in our standard of living in history, Chris, and of course worse than any of our peer countries. And at the same time, you've seen government budget deficits going over the cliff under Labor. So those two things have got to be fixed in parallel. What we're doing is saying, let's help households out in the short term and let's fix the government budget deficit in parallel with that. And that's what we're doing here. And what it means is we can get households back to where they need to be, get them on track, and at the same time move our overall budget deficit in the right direction, and do that in a way which is consistent with spending on really critical areas like defence. We've got a $12.7 billion extra spend in defence in those numbers. Make sure immigration is back where it needs to be, and that has a hit to the budget, but of course it hasn't helped households. It's made it worse. We've had immigration which has been completely out of line with where it needs to be. So these things are a balance, but the net outcome is a $14 billion improvement in the budget position and a $40 billion reduction in gross debt.
It's great to hear you talking today about shrinking the size of government, that is reducing government as a share of the economy. At the moment it's over 27%. Labor used to agree it needed to be below 25%, which is where the Coalition has managed to get it a couple of times in recent decades. The trouble is, though, getting it back down to 25% of the economy and getting the budget back into surplus. How far off could that be?
Well, you know, it ultimately depends on how well the economy grows and whether you can contain the growth in spending at a slower rate than the growth in the economy. And that's what we're doing. We're re-establishing that fiscal rule to grow the economy faster than spending and get the economy growing again. I mean, it has been a hopeless situation where we've seen 21 months in a row where GDP per person has gone backwards with a rapid growth, a record growth in population, over 1 million people in just 2 years, Chris. We've got to get this back into balance, get the economy growing again, and we know then, on the back of the sensible elimination of waste we've announced today, we can get our budget back to where it needs to be. And over time, with those rules, you get back to balance, and that's where we need to be.
There's no doubt there's a lot of waste in government spending, and as you say, you're suggesting paring back the public service numbers, especially in Canberra, to get those savings. You're talking about a hiring freeze in the public sector and allowing at least 41,000 jobs to come off the taxpayer-funded payroll. How long do you think that freeze could stay in place?
Well, we're proposing to have natural attrition and a hiring freeze over 5 years to get the reduction in the public service of 41,000 that we've already announced. We don't need to have bigger government. We need to have better government, Chris. And I've long worked in the private sector, much longer than I have in politics. And I learnt time and time again, you don't need to have a bigger team to have a better team. And there's amazing people working in the public service, but we don't need to make government bigger. And there's significant savings in getting that right. But there's savings in other areas. For instance, we don't need 28,000 kilometres of transmission lines crisscrossing some of the most beautiful agricultural country in the world. We don't need housing programs that haven't put a single family into a house, into a new house. We don't need manufacturing programs that support quantum computing companies in the west coast of the US. So there's a whole lot of areas where there's waste, not essential services like health. We need to make sure Australians get the health services they deserve. And we've certainly, in these costings, laid out or included the important investments we've got to make in defending our great nation at a time that's more uncertain than since the Second World War. This is about getting the balance right, and we think it gets the balance right.
Now, there are some indications that internal internal recriminations have begun within the Liberal Party over what's been a fairly lacklustre campaign. James Campbell, writing in the Herald Sun today, say that some of your colleagues anonymously are having a go at you. You should have got a tax policy out earlier. You're too interested in the leadership. What's your response to those claims?
Oh, look, it's the usual nonsense, Chris, and I don't take any notice of anonymous comments in the newspaper. But I tell you, there's a job I do want. There's a job I do want, and that's the Treasurer's job, because he's hopeless. He's out of touch. He's out of his depth. He doesn't understand economics. He's never had any material job in the private sector. He doesn't get what drives growth. He doesn't get what drives prosperity. And we've seen that over the last 3 years with the biggest hit to our standard of living in history, with small businesses going under at a record rate, 30,000 insolvencies, with an economy where people are giving up hope of starting a small business or owning one, with an economy where people are giving up hope of buying a home, young Australians who've just given up hope. We can do better than this, and that's why I want to be Treasurer of this great nation.
The polls are not particularly encouraging for the coalition, but I think they're going to swing around wildly between seats, and there'll be a lot of surprises on Saturday night. So we'll see where it all ends up.